Welcome to another Apollo Papyrus podcast episode. I am Aaron Apollo Camp. For this episode, my interview guest is the author of the novels Calm Down, Dear, Three-Way, and Soil. She has also written a companion short story to Soil titled Spooked. Her name is Stacy Walsh, and my interview with Stacy will follow the note-taking sounds. Stacy Walsh, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Feel free to introduce yourself to our listeners.
My name is Stacy Walsh. I'm an indie author in the Kansas City area. I write in the genres of psychological thrillers and horror books. I have 3 books published through Solstice Publishing. I have a short story published through them as well, and I have a 4th book on the way.
I'll start with what I think's the most recent book, but I might be wrong, and it's called Calm Down, Dear, and there's a period after each word in that title. Without spoiling too much of that novel, what is it about?
That was actually my debut novel. So it was the first one published, but it was actually the second one I wrote. That book was inspired by basically being a female and dealing with difficult relationships and dealing with basically unsafe relationships and not having a lot of support in our current society for women to find safety when they're in a relationship that's unsafe. So I wrote a book basically with that in mind, but what I did was swap the genders to the society being matriarchal instead of patriarchal. And so within the book, it's about the journey of a man named Sam who is in an unsafe relationship with a woman named Casey within a society where he doesn't have a lot of safety and he doesn't have a lot of he's not able to reach out to the system. It's built against him. So the book follows his journey within this relationship and what happens to him.
Another one of your novels is Three-Way. Without spoiling too much of that novel, what is it about?
That one is about I would say I'd categorize that one more as like a family drama. There's not a lot of mystery within that book, but there's a storyline essentially that goes through basically 3 people. That's why it's called Three-Way. It's kind of a play on words, but the 3 main characters are Katie, Trent, and Ellen. And Katie, Trent, and Ellen were all went to the same high school in the 90s. They had a situation happen at a party where all 3 of them were involved, and it was a traumatic event, and then the story follows them from that point throughout their lives to their adult versions and their own children, and how that event shaped them within their life and how it shaped how they raised their children. So it has multiple points of view. The chapters are all kind of from their point of view, and then some chapters are from their children's point of view, and it just follows through with how they ultimately live with what happened to them back in that time frame in the 90s.
The other novel you've written is titled Soil, and judging by the cover I've seen of it online, I'm assuming it has nothing to do with the U.S. Department of Agriculture soil taxonomy, but without spoiling too much of it, what is it about?
No, it does not have to do with that. So you mentioned the cover. I'll just real briefly give a plug to my teenage son. He made that cover for me. The cover is of a knife going through an apple, and the apple's bloody. So he actually did that in our front yard. It was kind of a funny story. He had to wear gloves, and we had fake blood, obviously. And he ended up like seeing all the neighbors and waving to them, trying to reassure them that nothing weird was going on. He was making me a cover for the book. So that was an interesting way to get that cover. That actually, Soil was the very first book I ever wrote. And it was inspired by actually a home that I lived in when I was growing up. And the book is completely fictional. It's totally made up. But within the book, I put these little nuggets of things that actually did happen to us within this house. A couple of the things that happened were I did hear music playing when I first went in the house, and we did have snakes in our vent at one point. And it was just the real house, the actual house that I lived in that was inspired the story was a very odd house. It sat vacant for many years. It was known as the haunted house in that neighborhood. We lived there, I think, 7, 8 years, and we don't have a lot of good memories. It was a very spooky house. So after I grew up, I dreamt about that house all the time. I would have real scary dreams with surrounding that home. I had a lot of bad nightmares while I lived there. And so I decided to write a book about basically a plot of land that had a lot of traumatic things happen on it. And so within the fictional story that I made up, I made all these different little stories within the story. And it's all about what happened either on the land before it was actually part of, a neighborhood, and then on the land when it was a new house. And then eventually that house gets torn down and another house is built on it. So the very final story or what the story that runs all the way through it is about a girl that lived in the new house once it was built on that particular piece of land. So it has a lot of little stories in it, but it's still a one story really altogether. It does have a bit of mystery in it. You have to figure out what exactly happened to cause all this bad energy that this one girl is feeling within the home, and she has her own traumatic experience within the home. But what was very interesting is after I wrote that book, I quit having bad dreams about the actual house that inspired it. So it was rather cathartic for me to write it.
There is a companion short story to Soil called Spooked. Without spoiling too much about Spooked, what is it about?
So Spooked, I wrote, it is a standalone short story. It's also within a compilation within the publishing company that I published through is called Solstice Publishing. I believe they're based in Texas, and they did an anthology with several of their authors. And so Spooked is within this anthology as well, called, I forgot what the anthology is called. It's called Fear, Love, and something else, Adventures. And they're doing several different books within that. And but Spooked, it basically, I would say you would want to read Soil first, because Spooked then follows the family that lives there after the main character in Soil. So the main character in Soil's name is Veda, and she lives in the home with her mom. They move out after the traumatic experience, and Spooked is about the next family that moves in there.
Are all of your written works psychological thrillers, or some or all your stories in different genres?
So I would say most of them would be considered psychological in nature. They have there's a lot of trauma within the stories I write. So Calm Down, Dear, and Soil, I would say really fit that psychological thriller mystery genre. Three-Way, I think, hits more of family drama, family suspense, but there's still some psychological aspects to it. They were all sort of inspired by just certain things in life that have either happened to me or that I know have happened, but they're all still made up. It's just around. Three-Way in particular has a pretty deep message regarding kind of our current state of in the United States, kind of women's rights and that kind of thing. There's a pretty deep message in there about that. So all the books sort of, I had a point in writing them.
You read The Shining by Stephen King when you were a young teenager. Did The Shining influence any of your own written works, and if so, how?
Yes, I would say I was very inspired by Stephen King's writings. I don't write anything like him because I don't think anybody can. So I would not say I'm comparatively to him. His books are just, I don't know how his mind works. They're amazing. But I've read several of his books, and The Shining was one that just stuck with me because of how he weaves the story. And it's just like you get all these little stories inside this one big story that he writes. And so it was one of my favorite books growing up. I really loved the story, and I really loved the movie, even though I know the movie had some missing parts to it. I actually told my oldest son that I would allow him to watch the Shining movie, but he had to read the book first. And so he did. And the part that he was so sad that they didn't put in the movie there's within the Shining book, there's in the maze that's outside of the hotel, there was hedge monsters. And he was like, why weren't those in the movie? don't know, but that was the part he was really missing. So I would say I was definitely inspired by that kind of writing. I don't think my books read like his at all.
How long did it take you to write each of your three novels?
Each one took about a year. The first one I wrote, Soil, was sort of an idea that lingered for a year or two before I actually put it on paper. It's one of those things of taking a leap into writing a novel. I had imposter syndrome. I was very nervous that, I couldn't do this and, or that it would be, not good or, eventually I got enough over that and just did it for myself. But each one has taken me a good year to complete.
What are the easiest and hardest aspects of writing novels for you?
I would say the easiest is once I'm going. I'll start with the easiest. Once I get going, the middle part of writing seems to flow really nicely. The hardest part is starting and ending and editing. I think that after I have sort of what I call word vomit, I just sort of write whatever comes to my head and then I go back through it and I want to make it perfect. That's the part that's hard because I'm real self-critical of it. I'll have days where I'll read what I've written and been like, that doesn't sound too bad. And other days I'll read what I've written and I'll be like, why am I even attempting to do this? So I think starting it, getting going and just doing it is hard. And then the end part is difficult for me to hang on and keep going and keep editing until I really feel like it's good. There's a lot of times I want to scrap it and say, this isn't good enough and just give up.
Now, your books are independently published. What was it like to get your books independently published?
So I've done two different ways of publishing. My first book, Soil, has been published twice because I completely self-published it the first time. That was difficult because I had to figure out how to copyright. I had to get an ISBN. I had to figure out how to like format the book so that it fit into the pages. I remember the first copy I got of Soil after I self-published was completely messed up. All the margins were off because I just didn't do it right. Eventually, I got it to where it worked out well, and I was very proud of it. But the reach is really hard when you're just self-published because there's just not a lot of ways as an independent author to get your name out there. With my second book, I did get a small independent publisher to give me a contract, and that's been helpful. It's still really up to us as the authors when you're with a small indie publisher, because I'm not with one of the big ones, to promote ourselves. But that opened up a lot of doors as far as there was just a feeling of like, I can do this now. I've got the backing of a small publisher, and they help with getting copyrights and all the ISBNs and all the formatting and doing the covers and all the things like that. So it's been a little bit, I feel like, easier with a small publisher backing, even though it's still really hard to get visibility. I think every indie author I've met, there's a pretty good community of them here in Kansas City where I live. We have a lot of book fair events where we can try to get some visibility. But every single one that I've met of us that are all basically either self-published or with very small independent publishers, visibility is the hardest part. We just don't have a big enough reach to, we're not with the big five. So we don't really get a lot of publicity.
You have another book in the works. Without spoiling too much of your upcoming book, what could you provide a preview of it?
Yeah, I could. So the book I just finished, it's called Shiny Happy Psycho. It is definitely squarely in the horror genre and mystery. And that book I really wrote just out of fun. I grew up in the 80s. I grew up on 80s slasher films, like, Friday the 13th and Nightmare on Elm Street. And I remember when Scream came out in the 90s, and it just sort of blew me away. I was like, they broke all the rules and they mocked it. And I was one of my favorite movies instantly. So I sort of had that movie in mind when I wrote this novel. I just wanted it to be something almost fun but creepy in that genre of like urban legend. So it basically, the story follows a group of kids that call themselves the Rockaway Five. in high school in the 90s in a fictional town that I made up called Rockaway, Missouri. There is a town close to that in Missouri, but it's not based on that town. So within this novel, this group of kids, the Rockaway Five in the 90s, you kind of follow their journey through high school. And at the end of their senior year, two of them get murdered. And so the other part of the book is going back and forth between the years of 2023 and 1993 as they try to uncover what they call the mystery of the murder shed, where these two kids got killed. So it's really was just more of a fun book to write. There wasn't a lot of inspiration as far as like societal pressures or norms or anything that I was trying to make a point of with this book. It was just having a good time.
For my final question, I'm going to talk about your work as a registered nurse before you became an author, and you did that for about a decade or so. What was your work as a nurse like?
So I was a nurse for about 10 years in the Kansas City area. I worked predominantly with children. So I worked in the ICU, the neonatal ICU. So I worked with babies that were very sick. And I did that. And I also worked through home health also with kids. So I mainly worked in that dynamic. That was my favorite thing to do. One of my favorite jobs I had as a nurse was I worked at a hospital here where I got to attend deliveries and help take care of the babies once they came out. And then especially if they weren't well, we got to take them back to the ICU and care for them there. So that was my main work. I also did home health for a little bit. And then I also worked with the government briefly. And I went back to the government to work when I was pregnant with my first son. I'm sorry, I was pregnant with my second son. And I went back and worked for them briefly before I finally kind of hung it up and decided to be a stay-at-home mom. And then as my kids got older, took the leap into writing.
Stacy, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing guest.
Well, thank you for having me. It's stuff like this that really helps our visibility as indie authors. So I greatly appreciate you setting aside time and allowing me to speak about my book. So thank you to you as well.
Stacy was a wonderful guest to interview, and I always enjoy interviewing fiction writers. Not long after I interviewed Stacy, her latest novel, Shiny Happy Psycho, was released. I'll include a link to Stacy's Amazon author page in the text description of the episode, as all of her books are on there. This is Aaron Apollo Camp reminding y'all to find your writing and reading purpose. Bye for now. Copyright 2025, Aaron Apollo Camp, all rights reserved. This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.